story that really caught my attention earlier this week. A train transporting combustible material was derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, late last week. Now, residents within a 2-mile radius were forced to evacuate as authorities carried out what was referred to as a controlled release of vinyl chloride from 5 train cars in order to prevent an explosion. Although, if you take a look at this video, it's pretty clear that it looks to be a bit of an explosion. And what's even worse—
No, it was a controlled demolition because they didn't want they didn't want it to fucking happen without. I think that part is normal. What's not normal, on the other hand, is because the derailment happened, those chemicals still absolutely fucking spilled over. And I think that controlled or not controlled, they most likely are undermining the environmental impact that this is having.
Talking about vinyl chloride, it's a chemical that's used to make car parts and PVC piping, but it's also linked to multiple cancers, and it can be deadly if breathed in for too long. Now, here to talk to us about this reporting is one of the main reporters on the piece, David Sirota. What happened between 2014 during the Obama administration and 2017 under the Trump administration when it came to these regulations pertaining to trains?
So there was a derailment in 2012 in New Jersey that involved actually the same chemical, vinyl chloride, that you mentioned, and there was pressure on regulators to do something about those kinds of trains and about oil trains. There had been a number of derailments involving trains carrying crude oil, and so the Obama administration had a rule proposed, an initial rule proposed, to better regulate these trains. And it's important to trace how this rulemaking went. The rule proposed, or really asked, what kinds of chemicals should be regulated or subject to stricter regulation when being transported, and then what should those stricter regulations look like? And what happened was that the National Transportation Safety Board told the regulatory agency, said, listen, these regulations should broadly cover not just oil, they should cover what's known as Class 2 chemicals, which include, again, vinyl chloride, and the chemical industry lobbyists and other industry lobbyists went to work pressuring the regulatory agency to limit the definition of what a high hazard flammable train is. Limit it in a way that the train in Ohio, which you just saw on screen burst into flames, into a fireball, that kind of train ended up not being classified as a high hazard flammable train, even though the images certainly show that it was high hazard and certainly flammable. The second part of what happened was that trains that were subject to this rule were going to be required to use a special kind of new braking system to try to deter or at least reduce the damage from derailments. Most trains in the country are still using technology from the Civil War era, from the 1800s. And this was a new technology that, by the way, Norfolk Southern itself in previous years had said would significantly improve safety on the rails. But when the rule mandated that the industry embrace this and use it in a much more expansive kind of way across the nation's rails, the railroad industry sort of changed its tune. It didn't want the mandate. It cited cost concerns to pressure against that rule. Now, Obama's rule, although narrowed, included that measure to expand the larger use of those brakes on the nation's rail system. But what happened was that then Donald Trump got into office. Donald Trump, Senate Republicans in that 2016 election, the Republican Party got about $6 million plus from the rail industry. And Senate Republicans started beating the drum for Trump to repeal the rule. Beating the drum, by the way, with obviously the rail industry lobbyists. Donald Trump repealed the brake rule so that the nation's rails, the industry, does not have to kind of universally or even start to use these kinds of brakes. One former Federal Railroad Administration regulator told us that these brakes, which are known as ECP brakes, would have mitigated a disaster like this. But Norfolk Southern was one of the companies that was railing against requiring these brakes on their trains. Federal officials told us that this train did not have those brakes on the train. Well, I think in this case, what's really interesting is that the same company that pushed to repeal this rule was a company that was touting these brakes in prior years before that. They were saying these brakes are so good, we shouldn't necessarily have to follow other stricter safety rules because this new brake technology that we like can be used and can improve our safety. But the moment the government was considering making it a mandate, a requirement, and again, remember, it was narrowed in scope to the number of trains that mandate would affect. So even after it was narrowed, they didn't want a requirement for this. And look, they made the argument that the costs outweighed the benefits. And what they were, in granular detail, what they were saying was the costs to put these brakes on will raise costs for goods across the country.
Oh man, we just can't do it, brother. There's no way. Meanwhile, they got billions of dollars in liquid fucking cash that they're utilizing for stock buybacks. So it's just an absolute fucking lie. On Vice from March 22nd, 2021. It's going to end up like Boeing. How freight rail is courting catastrophe. Workers are sounding the alarm and drastic cuts in employees and maintenance in order to increase profits are tempting fate. 2 years ago, they wrote this article, but that's not the last time, nor was it the first time that people have actually complained about this. People have been complaining about regulation and safety. Like, the workers' unions have been complaining about regulation and safety for a long time. Here, back in December, a union rail worker warned about the potential for a catastrophic train derailment. Then a week ago, it happened in Ohio.
Rail workers warned us about disaster like this. I heard firsthand months ago about the corporate practice of precision scheduled railroading.
Precision scheduled railroading is shorter staff, longer hours, longer trains, less safety, less maintenance. Do I have all that right?
Oh, you got it all right. I
Okay.
mean, a lot of the derailments that you're seeing on national TV is one of a few things. It's lack of maintenance on the track, or they've cut the track gangs too short and they can't get out to fix it, or they've cut the carmen's, which is the union that works on the rail cars. So we have one derailment here in Northeast Ohio where a wheel flange was very thin. It picked a switch and derailed the entire train. Luckily, it was full of candle wax and not something highly volatile.
Rail workers tried to strike over this stuff, but were stopped by Congress. A few weeks later, and here we are. Several Norfolk...
When you want to understand why the fuck mainstream news is not covering a mini Chernobyl that occurred in fucking East Palestine, Ohio, understand that this is part of the reason. Because mainstream news is liberal, okay? Let's be real. Liberal, not in the sense that they like defend the Democratic Party over like, gender bills or whatever, which they clearly don't, by the way. They don't even fucking talk about all of the insane amounts of anti-trans legislation that's passing all around the country. But liberal in the sense that they're anti-union, liberal in the sense that they are beholden to capitalists and the interests of capital owners. If you talk about a massive train derailment that possibly has long-standing consequences, like health complications that are going to occur as a consequence of this. Animals fucking dying in this region, okay? People that will get cancer because of the carcinogens that are now all over the air that they breathe, okay? If you talk about all that, immediately after the railroad unions collectively said this is going to happen weeks prior and Joe Biden fucking shut that shit down, all of a sudden, things look a little bit different. Wow, if only Biden didn't personally intervene with the rail strikes. I mean, that literally did happen. Yes, that is exactly what happened. Most pro-union president in the history, right?
Southern cars of toxic, highly volatile chemicals exploded fantastically in the tiny town of East Palestine, Ohio, 20 miles from where I grew up. So I met Clyde in East Palestine to ask him about it.
It looks like a faulty bearing caused a catastrophic derailment. These railroads are turning profits hand over fist. They've cut their workforce to bare bones, and now they're paying the price for it because the wheels are falling off the train, basically. Carmen were inspecting cars about 3 minutes per car. That's always been the industry standard. Now it's 90 seconds per car. The wheels are falling off the train, basically. Carmen were inspecting cars about 3 minutes per car. That's always been the industry standard. Now it's 90 seconds per car.
Is that because of PSR?
Yes, it's a rush job right now. And these guys are under pressure. I mean, they're working men and women. And, if they don't hurry up and get this car done, they're going to be fired.
Great points. So I went to a press conference with Norfolk Southern and Ohio Governor Mike DeWine to ask them about this.
What could precision scheduled railroad have to do with the axle failure that caused the derailment?
I have no idea that it's a mechanical issue. Precision scheduled railroading is a management process.
Not a great answer, and that's probably because Norfolk Southern let a worker take the fall, rather than a single corporate executive showing up in the town that they polluted to be held accountable. You see, Wall Street owns Norfolk Southern. 74% of shares are owned by a who's who of infamous hedge funds, and this is the business model that they demand. Profit at any cost. And disaster like this is simply a cost of doing business. They cut everything, make all the money, and pay off disasters in tiny flyover towns from the profit. But instead of answering for any of that.
Oh, speaking of the payout, you want to see the payout? You want to see the fucking fuck you money that they gave to the town? They gave $25,000. Residents of East Palestine, Ohio aren't even sure if their town is safe. They're extremely troubled by dead fish in the local stream and dead chickens found in a neighboring town. But guess what, guys? Don't worry. Norfolk Southern has got your back. $25,000 to an Ohio town where it caused a life or death evacuation. Remember, the local news at the time was reporting if you are in this area, if you're in the area of the smoke cloud, it's danger, grave danger to life. They evacuated the entire town. A couple days later, they're like, come on, you can come back in. It's all good. But fear not, 25 grand, baby. You're good.